I was standing in the grand marble lobby of the five-star hotel called the Cloister. Two massive security guards gripped my shoulders tightly as they dragged me toward the front entrance under the disgusted stares of wealthy guests. My clothes were torn apart. Across my old suit jacket spread a large dark bloodstain that had already dried. I looked less like a father attending his son's wedding, and more like a criminal who had wandered into a palace by mistake. Across the lobby stood Felicity and Carlton, my son's rich in-laws, staring at me with open contempt. Felicity lifted her hand to cover her nose as if my May presence polluted the air around her. My son Bradley stood frozen behind them. He could not even look his own father in the eye. He chose silence to protect the pride of his wife's family. They threw me out because of the blood on my shirt, but they had no idea that blood was worth $9 million they were about to lose. My sons-in-laws had looked down on me my entire life. To them, I was nothing more than a retired water department worker from the bottom of society. They believed their money could buy everything, including human dignity. They were wrong. Exactly 15 minutes later, a powerful woman stepped out of a luxury car and walked into that hotel lobby. The moment she appeared, everyone who had mocked me began to tremble. And what she said to them that night is a story I will tell my grandchildren until the day I die. Welcome back to Dad's Revenge Real Life. Grab yourself a drink, maybe a snack, settle in comfortably, and remember this. The people in these stories always had the chance to do the right thing. They simply chose not to. Subscribe for more intense family drama stories. And before we begin, tell me which state or city you are watching from tonight. Life is strange sometimes. The people who speak the loudest about morality and kindness often carry the darkest hearts. They wear elegant clothes and sparkling diamonds while their character rots underneath. Meanwhile, true kindness is often hidden beneath worn-out jackets and rough hands stained by years of honest work. This story is not about showing off wealth or power. It is about the price of arrogance and the reward waiting for a compassionate heart. Let me take you back to the beginning of that day. Everything started with a phone call from my son filled with pride and condescension. That morning began with the sharp ringing of the telephone. It shattered the silence inside my small, lonely house. The moment I saw Bradley's name glowing on the screen, my heart tightened painfully. My son had not called home in 3 months. His voice came through the speaker, cold and distant. There was no question about my health, no concern about how his old father had been living lately. He went straight to the point with a horrid tone filled with pressure. Tonight was the 25th wedding anniversary celebration for his wealthy in-laws, the Halvis and Beauchamp family. A grand event held at the most luxurious five-star hotel in the city. Bradley hesitated for a few seconds before saying something that made my chest feel heavy. He told me I did not need to dress too formally. A sports jacket would be good enough for me. It sounded like harmless advice, but I understood the real meaning behind those words immediately. It was a quiet insult aimed at my social status. My son was ashamed of me. He feared that my old age and modest appearance would embarrass him in front of his rich wife's family. He was terrified that I might ruin the perfect image he had worked so hard to create. After the call ended, I sat motionless on my worn-out sofa. The house felt unbearably empty. Ever since Helen, my beloved wife, passed away, loneliness had become my only companion. I lifted my eyes toward our wedding photograph hanging on the wall. Helen's gentle smile seemed to comfort me even now. I walked into the kitchen to make a piece of toast. The old toaster suddenly sparked and began burning the bread black while smoke filled the room. The bitter smell spread through the kitchen like the darkness that had settled over my life. I coughed violently and rushed to open the windows wide. Outside, a small cardinal rested on a tree branch. It chirped cheerfully before soaring freely into the open sky. I watched the bird for a long moment before lowering my eyes to my rough-weathered hands. Hands that had spent 38 years working honestly for the city water department. I wondered when honesty and hard work had become something children were ashamed of. The loneliness in my chest rose painfully into my throat. But for Bradley's happiness, I convinced myself to endure it. I walked to my closet and took out the best suit I owned. A black suit with worn shoulders, but carefully pressed and spotless. Then I placed $200 of savings into an envelope. It was a small gift meant to honor my sons-in-laws and bless their celebration. I stepped out of my house with a calm heart, completely unaware of what awaited me ahead. I did not know that this journey would drag me into a life-or-death situation. When 27 luxury cars drove past the accident scene without stopping, only one old Bic pulled over, and that was a moment fate changed everything. What happened on that lonely road that forced me to sacrifice even my dignity? I drove my old Bic toward the anniversary party, but my mind was crowded with bitter memories of my son's wealthy in-laws. The Halverson Beauchamp family lived in a world completely different from mine. Carlton was a famous cosmetic surgeon who catered to the rich and powerful. Felicity spent her days organizing charity galas for royal thoroughbred horses. They owned enormous mansions, attended elite social events, and surrounded themselves with influential people. To them, a retired water department worker like me was nothing more than a stain on their family reputation. Every time our paths crossed, they treated me like an unwanted shadow. One luxury car after another raced down the highway toward the city. They could clearly see the accident. They could hear the screams. Yet not a single car slowed down. The first car sped past. Then the second, the third, the fourth. Every driver pressed harder on the gas, as if terrified that compassion might inconvenience them. They did not want blood or smoke near their expensive cars. They did not want a roadside tragedy to delay their glamorous dinners and private parties. I counted them silently with growing bitterness. 27 luxury cars passed by without stopping. 27 people chose comfort over human life. The cruelty of it sent a chill deeper through me than the rain ever could. At that moment, instinct took over. For 5 years, I had cared for my late wife, Helen, during her epilepsy attacks. I knew what panic looked like. I knew how quickly seconds could become the difference between life and death if I wasted time now. The SUV could explode or the child could suffocate from the smoke. I could not stand there like the other 27 selfish strangers. I forgot about my clean press suit. I forgot about the anniversary party. I forgot about the wealthy family waiting to judge me. I ran straight toward the burning vehicle. Mud splashed across my shoes while shattered glass crunched beneath every step. When I reached the back door, I saw it had been twisted completely out of shape. Through the cracked window, I could barely make out a little girl around 5 years old. She was crying weakly, her tiny face pale from fear and lack of oxygen. Her mother, trapped in the front seat, was desperately trying to reach back toward her, but one of her legs was pinned beneath the dashboard. I grabbed the rear door handle with both hands and pulled with every ounce of strength left in my 60-year-old body. Metal shrieked violently beneath my grip, but the door did not move at all. Smoke from the engine poured thicker into the cabin. The little girl started coughing harder. Her cries became weaker and weaker. Below the SUV, the fire suddenly flared brighter. And in that terrifying moment, I realized I had only one final chance to save that child before it was too late. I grabbed a large rock from the side of the road and smashed it against the SUV window with all my strength. The glass exploded into thousands of sharp fragments. Without hesitating, I shoved my arm through the broken opening while jagged pieces sliced into my skin. Pain burned through my hand, but I ignored it completely. I reached inside, unlocked the door, and yanked it open with every ounce of strength left in me. Thick, poisonous smoke burst out of the cabin, making me cough violently. I leaned inside the burning vehicle and pulled the little girl into my arms just seconds before flames reached the back seat. Holding her tightly against my chest, I ran nearly 30 feet away from the SUV. The moment I stopped, a small explosion thundered behind us. I gently laid the child down on the rain-soaked grass beside the highway. Without thinking twice, I removed my carefully pressed suit jacket and rolled it into a pillow beneath her head. Her name was Caitlin. She was gasping for breath while her tiny body trembled uncontrollably from fear. Blood from a cut on her forehead mixed with mud and wet grass all over my clothes. My white shirt was now stained with dark blood and date. But none of that mattered to me. I held Caitlin's small trembling hand and spoke to her as softly as I could. I told her everything was all right now. I told her she was safe. Her mother, Genevieve, had finally managed to crawl out through the front door of the SUV. The moment she reached her daughter, she collapsed beside her and wrapped the little girl in her arms while sobbing uncontrollably. She kept thanking me over and over again between desperate breaths. In the distance, the sound of approaching ambulance sirens cut through the rain. Suddenly, Genevieve remembered something important. She handed me an expensive designer handbag and begged me to hold on to it while she rode with Caitlin to the hospital. She explained that it contained extremely important documents. Then the paramedics rushed them away. I stood alone in the pouring rain, watching the ambulance disappear into the darkness. For a moment, I looked at my reflection in the side mirror of my old Bic. My hair was soaked and disheveled. My clothes were torn apart and covered in mud and blood. I pulled out my phone to check the time, and my stomach dropped instantly. I was already more than an hour late for the anniversary party. Panicked, I climbed back into my Bic and drove straight toward the Cloister. I had no idea that my appearance would soon turn me into the center of a horrifying nightmare. I was about to face the cruelest humiliation of my life from the very people who called themselves family. How would those polished, wealthy elites react when a blood-covered old man walked into the middle of a glamorous celebration? I pulled my old Bic up in front of the grand entrance of the Cloister. Crystal chandeliers glowed through the massive windows, spilling golden light across the marble driveway like something out of a dream. I stepped out of the car, still holding the stranger's handbag tightly in my hand. The valet attendant looked me up and down with open disgust. He did not even bother walking over to take my keys. Instead, he crossed his arms and loudly demanded that I move my wreck of a car somewhere else before it ruined the appearance of the entrance. I ignored him completely. Without saying a word, I hurried through the revolving glass doors and entered the hotel lobby. The sound of my worn shoes striking the polished marble floor echoed awkwardly through the elegant ballroom. The moment I stepped inside, a chilling silence spread across the room. Even the soft classical music seemed to fade away. Every guest dressed in designer suits and sparkling gowns slowly turned to stare at me. Then the whispering began. Cruel whispers, mocking whispers. They looked at me as if I was some filthy creature that had wandered in from another world to contaminate their perfect evening. I saw fingers pointing toward my blood-stained clothes. I saw smug smiles curling across faces hidden behind champagne glasses. These people called themselves refined and noble, yet their eyes dripped with cruelty. And no one looked more horrified than my son's in-laws. From across the ballroom, Felicity spotted me, and her face instantly turned bright red with humiliation and rage. The wine glass in her hand trembled violently. She could not believe that her son-in-law's father had dared to appear at a prestigious celebration looking like this. Carlton stormed toward me with fury burning in his eyes. He never once asked if I was hurt. He never asked what had happened. Instead, he grabbed my arm aggressively and squeezed so hard it felt like my bones might crack. He dragged me across the ballroom as if I were a dangerous lunatic being removed from a public place. Bradley followed closely behind us, his face pale with panic, but he said nothing, not one word to defend his own father. He stood there watching Carlton humiliate me in front of everyone without opening his mouth even once. That silence wounded me more deeply than all the cruelty from strangers. Carlton shoved me into a deserted hallway near the service storage rooms. He stood in front of me like a judge preparing to sentence a criminal. Then he pointed angrily at the bloodstains covering my shirt. What came out of his mouth next would ignite a vicious confrontation that pushed every ounce of pain and humiliation inside me to the breaking point. Carlton stepped closer until his face was only inches from mine. His breath wry of expensive whiskey. Through clenched teeth, he demanded to know what kind of disgraceful stunt I thought I was pulling. He asked if I had any idea how important this night was for his family. Felicity stormed out into the hallway beside him, crossing her arms tightly over her chest with absolute disgust written across her face. She said I looked like a homeless beggar dragged out of a garbage dump. Then she pointed at the bloodstains covering my shirt and shouted that my filthy appearance was ruining the expensive carpets of the Cloister. She proudly announced that the mayor himself and some of the most powerful businessmen in the city were attending tonight's celebration. According to her, the presence of a shabby retired water department worker like me was an insult to everyone in that ballroom. I turned desperately toward Bradley, hoping my son would finally show even a shred of understanding. I explained that there had been an accident on the highway. I told him I had just saved a little girl's life, but Bradley lowered his head in shame. Then he quietly asked why I had not gone home to change clothes before coming to party. He said I was humiliating him. He said he did not even know how to face his wife's parents anymore because of me. Those words cut through my heart like a knife. I had sacrificed my entire life to raise that boy, and now he was ashamed of the father who gave him everything. Carlton refused to let me explain another word. He snapped his fingers and called over 2 massive hotel security guards. In a cold, furious voice, he ordered them to throw me out immediately. He declared that filthy poor people like me had no right to breathe the same air as respectable upper-class guests. The guards grabbed both of my shoulders and dragged me across the lobby while guests gathered near the entrance to watch the humiliation unfold. Some whispered, some laughed, others stared at me with cruel amusement as if I were entertainment for the evening. The guards shoved me through the revolving door so violently that I crashed onto the cold stone steps outside the hotel entrance. The stranger's designer handbag flew from my hands and landed beside me in the pouring rain. If you feel furious for Mr. Hollis right now, leave a like and comment the number 1 to support kindness and humanity. I sat alone on the wet stone steps beneath the heavy rain. Water streamed down my face, mixing with tears of humiliation and heartbreak. I could not stop asking myself when kindness had become a crime. How could a man who had just saved a child's life be treated like a criminal by his own family? I stared at the expensive handbag, lying abandoned beside me. Part of me wanted to stand up, get back into my old Bic, and drive away forever without ever seeing my cowardly son again. But the moment my fingers touched the handle of the bag, the sharp scream of brakes echoed across the entrance driveway. A black Rolls-Royce stopped directly in front of the hotel. The rear door slowly opened, and a powerful woman stepped out into the rain. That single moment was about to change everything and ignite a devastating reckoning none of them would ever forget. The woman stepped out of the black Rolls-Royce with urgency written all over her face. It was Genevieve Ashworth. Her designer dress was still stained with rainwater and mud from the accident scene. Though worry clouded her expression, her presence radiated the unmistakable authority of someone used to commanding entire rooms with a single glance. The moment she saw me sitting on the freezing stone steps in torn blood-stained clothes, she stopped abruptly. Shock flashed across her face before turning into cold fury as she noticed the 2 security guards still standing nearby watching me like a dangerous criminal. Genevieve hurried toward me without hesitation. She bent down and personally helped me to my feet. Then she picked up her handbag and carefully supported my arm with genuine respect. Her voice trembled with disbelief as she asked why the man who had saved her granddaughter's life was sitting outside in the rain like this. I remained silent. I only looked through the glass doors toward the ballroom inside. At that exact moment, Felicity and Carlton rushed out of the hotel entrance, eager to welcome their wealthy, distinguished guest. They had assumed Genevieve Ashworth arrived to attend the anniversary celebration, but the moment they saw her standing beside me, their arrogant smiles disappeared instantly. Their faces turned pale. Carlton quickly tried to explain himself, stammering nervously. He claimed that I was merely some unstable homeless man who had sneaked into the party and caused trouble. He insisted they had removed me only to protect the safety and dignity of the guests. Felicity immediately joined in, saying my filthy appearance would have contaminated the entire evening. Genevieve did not even let them finish speaking. She turned sharply toward them, her eyes colder than steel. Then she tightened her grip on my arm and delivered a sentence that struck them like lightning. She announced that this so-called filthy old man had risked his own life to pull her granddaughter from a burning vehicle. While 27 other luxury cars drove past without stopping, silence crashed over the entrance. Without another word, Genevieve guided me back toward the grand ballroom of the Cloister. The same 2 security guards who had thrown me out moments earlier now lowered their heads in shame, too terrified to say a single word. Felicity and Carlton followed behind us with trembling steps. The full weight of Genevieve Ashworth's identity was finally beginning to settle over the room. She was not an ordinary woman. She was the largest diamond-level donor behind the International Medical Center project Carlton desperately wanted attached to his name and career. And now the most satisfying reckoning imaginable was about to unfold in front of 300 wealthy guests standing frozen inside the ballroom. What would Genevieve Ashworth do next to expose the true faces hiding behind all that luxury and prestige? Genevieve Ashworth led me straight into the center of the magnificent ballroom. The moment we entered, all 300 wealthy guests fell completely silent. Every eye in the room locked onto the most powerful woman in the city, walking beside an old man covered in blood, mud, and torn clothing. Behind us, Carlton and Felicity followed like ghosts. Their faces had gone completely pale. Genevieve climbed onto the stage and took hold of the microphone. Her voice rang through the grand ballroom, sharp, powerful, and impossible to ignore. She announced to every guest present that Mr. Hollis was the greatest benefactor the Ashworth family could ever ask for. She declared that I had risked my own life to save her granddaughter Caitlin from a vehicle moments away from exploding while 27 luxury cars chose to drive past and ignore a dying child. A wave of shocked whispers spread across the room. Then Genevieve slowly turned toward Carlton and Felicity. The disgust in her eyes was unmistakable. In front of everyone, she publicly can-led the entire $9 million donation intended for Carlton's new international hospital project. Her words struck like hammers against their pride. She said the people hoping to carve their names into a hospital building possessed hearts far too ugly to deserve such honor. A cosmetic surgeon who constantly preached beauty and compassion had just thrown out a kind old father because of bloodstains on his shirt. A woman who spent fortunes rescuing thoroughbred horses had valued a luxury hotel carpet more than the life of a frightened little girl. Money, she said, could build beautiful towers and elegant foundations, but it could never purchase humanity. The ballroom erupted into whispers once again, but this time the whispers were filled with shame and disgust toward the Halverson Beauchamp family. Guests quietly stepped farther away from Carlton and Felicity, as though humiliation itself were contagious. Carlton stood frozen on the stage, his lips trembling helplessly. The reputation and prestige he had spent decades building collapsed around him in a single night. Felicity covered her face while tears streamed down her cheeks as the same judgmental eyes she once used against others now turned mercilessly upon her. Every layer of their polished fake image had been ripped apart beneath the bright ballroom lights. From the corner of the room, Bradley stared at me with overwhelming shame and regret burning in his eyes. Seeing that late realization inside, my son made me release a quiet, exhausted sigh. Whitney stepped beside him and gently held his hand. Then Bradley slowly walked toward me before lowering his head in apology. He admitted he had been weak, selfish, and blinded by fear of losing status and approval. At that moment, Bradley and Whitney chose to leave the luxurious celebration behind and stand beside me instead. They turned their backs on empty prestige and chose kindness over arrogance. Genevieve smiled warmly at the three of us and announced that her Rolls-Royce was waiting outside to take us to dinner. Together, we walked out of the Cloister with our heads held high while the Halverson Beauchamp family remained trapped inside the ruins of their shattered reputation. The elite society they worshipped had already begun abandoning them completely. Justice had finally arrived for those who looked down on human dignity. It should have been the perfect ending. But later that night, during a simple, humble dinner far away from the glittering ballroom, an unexpected moment would heal wounds inside my heart that I believed could never recover. What was a surprise that finally brought peace back to a broken father soul. The Rolls-Royce finally stopped in front of a small roadside diner, glowing beneath dim yellow lights. Inside, the soft clatter of silverware and the comforting smell of simple homemade food slowly washed away the tension of the terrible night behind us. We gathered around an old wooden table near the window. Bradley looked at me with red swollen eyes filled with shame and regret. Then my son gently took my rough-weathered hands into his own and offered the most sincere apology I had ever heard from him. For the first time in years, I could see that Bradley had truly awakened. The storm of humiliation and heartbreak had forced him to understand something priceless. All the wealth, prestige, and glamorous status in the world could never compare to the love of family and the dignity of a good heart. At that moment, Genevieve's phone rang softly. A bright, cheerful voice burst through the speaker. It was little Caitlin. She had fully regained consciousness and wanted to personally thank Grandpa Hollis for saving her life. Genevieve smiled warmly before showing me a photograph Caitlin had drawn from her hospital bed. The picture was messy and uneven, like most children's drawings, but to me, it looked more valuable than any masterpiece in the world. In the drawing, an old man wearing a black suit stood with his arms stretched wide, protecting a little girl from danger. I stared at that picture for a long, quiet moment. No medal, no fortune, no grand award could ever mean more to me than that child's innocent gratitude. Outside the diner window, pale streetlights flickered softly through the rain. I leaned back in my chair and smiled for what felt like the first time in years. Life has a strange way of balancing itself. Character is not built inside luxurious ballrooms or behind expensive designer clothes. True character is revealed in darkness when nobody is watching. It appears in the moment when you must choose between driving past suffering or stopping to help another human being in need. People like Felicity and Carlton spent their lives measuring human worth through money and social status. In the end, all their wealth left them empty and alone. But kindness given from a sincere heart always finds its way back home eventually. Never be ashamed of hardworking hands. Keep being kind even when the world tries to convince you that kindness is weakness. Click the video on the left to hear another unforgettable story filled with heartbreak, justice, and redemption. Tonight, the mud on my hands and the bloodstains on my clothes became proof that my life had truly meant something. Because when all the luxury disappears and every light finally goes dark, character is the only thing you carry with you through the final door. So tell me honestly, would you rather become a humble holist with a good heart or a glamorous felicity with an empty soul? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. My story ends here tonight. Dad's Revenge Real Life thanks you for listening and staying with me until the very end. May you always protect the goodness inside your heart no matter how cruel the world becomes.